Once the widow of Hollow Ridge was gone, but the house still spoke her name, in the breath between the floorboards and the slow stirring of the mountain fog. Before we continue, take a breath. The past is closer than you think. Subscribe to remember what others forgot. The ridge was a place the sun reached last, as though even daylight feared to touch the house perched upon its spine. Hollow Ridge was a thin stretch of land in the Appalachia of 1901, where cabins clung to slopes like bruised bones and the wind carried the voices of those who had nowhere else to go. Travelers passed through quietly, never lingering long enough to learn the stories. Residents survived by routine, superstition, and the hush of things left unsaid. At the ridge's highest point stood a house built by hands long dead. A house that seemed to lean inward as though listening. A house where silence did not mean safety. This was the home of Miriam Crow, known even in her lifetime only as the widow. She was a tall, iron-boned woman whose presence unsettled even the most hardened loggers who stopped by her land to buy preserves or jerky. Her hair, always pinned back, was the color of dried wheat. Her eyes were the pale, faded blue of glacier water, the kind that remembers every life it has drowned. Miriam did not smile, but neither did she threaten. She simply existed with an intensity that made the world around her feel dimmer. Her husband, Thomas Crow, had died 12 winters earlier after falling into the ravine that split the ridge in two. At least, that was the version most people accepted. Another version, one spoken only behind closed doors, suggested the widow had pushed him. Another whispered that she had simply watched. Whatever the truth, Miriam Crow remained, raising her two sons, Silas and Ephraim, alone in the house Thomas had built. The boys were grown men by 1901. Silas at 28, quiet, gentle, and strong as the oaks he chopped for firewood. Ephraim at 26, quicker to temper, quicker to bruise, quicker to laugh in ways that never reached his eyes. They had their father's dark hair, their mother's pale eyes, and something else, something no one could name without feeling cold. Some families aged like seasons, their faces softening over the years. But the Crows aged like storms. Something sharpened them instead of wearing them down. That year winter came early. Snow arrived before the harvest could be canned and stored, sealing the ridge in a silence that felt almost deliberate. The creek froze into a glass-blue ribbon. The pines bowed under white weight. The widow's house, with its narrow windows and steep roof, looked like a creature waiting in the dark. Inside, life continued in patterns as rigid as the wooden beams overhead. Wake before dawn. Pray without speaking. Work without rest. Eat without asking questions. Miriam oversaw everything. She watched her sons with the same unblinking attention she gave the candles when she trimmed their wicks. Always measuring. Always expecting. Always wanting something they did not understand. Some nights, she made them kneel at the end of the long dining table while she sat upright in a chair carved by Thomas's own hands. There, she would recite scripture in a voice so controlled it resembled neither devotion nor ritual, but something colder, something exacting. Silas endured it. Ephraim resented it. Both obeyed. And somewhere between obedience and fear, the house seemed to inhale, listening. Rumors traveled down the mountain each time someone spotted Miriam Crow walking alone by lantern light, her boots crushing the frost with purpose. Folks whispered that she spoke to the woods. Others said she slept facing the east window every night so she could watch the family graveyard breathe beneath the moon. But the most unsettling rumor was the quietest one, that Miriam was preparing her sons for something. A legacy. A duty. A deed too unbearable to say aloud. In town, the storekeeper's wife remarked that Silas looked paler each visit, as though something were draining him from within. Children said Ephraim's eyes changed colors depending on the day, sometimes gray like rain, sometimes black like the ravine. People wondered why no woman had ever courted either of them. Why the Crow family tree seemed frozen in time. Why Miriam, who claimed to value bloodline and righteousness above all, kept her sons as close as wolves kept their young. Fog rolled over the ridge that December, thick enough to swallow lanterns whole. Nights crept in early, bringing with them the sound of slow footsteps on the house's upper floor. But the sons slept downstairs. And the widow did not pace. At least, not until after midnight. On the 17th night of the freeze, Silas awoke before dawn with the sense that someone had been standing over him. He rose from his cot, the air so cold it bit the inside of his throat. The house was still. Too still. Even the wind held its breath. He stepped into the main room and found his mother seated at the table, her spine straight, her hands folded, her face turned toward the window overlooking the family graves. She did not blink. She did not acknowledge him. She simply stared. "Ma." Silas whispered. Miriam lifted her chin a fraction, her eyes distant, almost luminous. "It won't be long now," she murmured. Silas felt something shift, not in the house, not in the air, but in the marrow of his own bones. Behind him, Ephraim stirred awake with a low grunt, unaware that the ridge had begun to move in ways that could not be undone. Outside, the fog curled around the house like a question. Inside, the widow crow smiled, small, soft, satisfied. A smile that marked the quiet beginning of a horror no one on Hollow Ridge was prepared to witness. And the house, ancient and listening, held its breath for what would come next. The fog did not lift the next morning. It thickened, pressing against the windows like breath from something vast and unseen. Even the crows, those black keepers of mountain omens, remained silent on the frost-stiff branches. Silas and Ephraim worked as they always did, splitting logs, clearing the frozen path, tending to the animals, but an unease clung to their every motion. It was not fear. Fear was familiar on Hollow Ridge. This was different. This was expectation, the sense that something had awakened in the night and now watched them with patient hunger. Inside the house, Miriam Crow drifted from room to room like a shadow unbound by weight. She lit candles even in daylight, whispering prayers so faint the flame barely trembled. She opened every window despite the cold, muttering that the air needed to change, that the ridge was shifting, that the blood in their walls was restless. Silas avoided her eyes. Ephraim didn't bother trying. By the third day the brothers noticed footprints outside, small, precise, and made by bare feet. They circled the house once, then vanished into the woods without disturbing a single snowdrift. Ephraim spat when he saw them. "It's her," he muttered. Silas didn't answer. The truth felt too heavy to hold with words. The widow's strangeness grew with each passing night. She no longer sat at the table staring toward the graves. Now she stood at the doorway to the unfinished attic, listening to something only she could hear. Hours passed. Her breath fogged the air, but she did not shiver. She rarely blinked. On the sixth night, Silas awoke to the sound of laughter. Not loud, not joyous, but quiet and breathless, like someone trying to remember how laughter once felt. He rose from his cot and followed the sound to the stairs leading to the upper rooms. The attic door was open. Candlelight spilled through the crack, flickering against the warped boards. He heard his mother's voice, soft and rhythmic as though comforting a child. Silas's limbs stiffened. They had no children in the house. Ephraim emerged behind him, half asleep and irritated. But when he saw Silas's expression, all anger drained from his face. Together they approached the attic. Miriam's voice floated down the stairs. "You will continue the line. You will not fail as he did. The ridge chose you. The house chose you. Blood binds and blood obeys." Ephraim inhaled sharply. Silas shook his head, desperate to believe this was another of her strange rituals, scripture twisted by grief, a lonely woman wandering into madness. But something in her tone felt too deliberate, too certain. When Silas pushed the door fully open, the candle flame faltered. Miriam Crow stood in the middle of the attic, facing the boarded window. Her back was rigid, her hands clasped at her waist. Dust motes swirled around her like drifting ash. She was alone. Yet the air felt crowded. Silas stepped forward. "Ma." She turned, not slowly but sharply as though pulled by an unseen string. Her eyes glowed pale in the candlelight. "It's time," she said. "For what?" "For the continuation of what your father resisted." Ephraim scoffed, but his voice cracked. "Quit speaking in riddles. Ain't no one here but us." Miriam's gaze sharpened, glacial and merciless. "Your father tried to break the chain. He refused the ridge's claim. And look what it cost him." Silas swallowed. "He fell." "He was taken," she corrected. A cold draft swept the attic. The candle flickered violently. Silas stepped backward without meaning to. Ephraim's jaw clenched, but his hands trembled at his sides. Miriam raised one hand toward the ceiling beams, her fingers curling and uncurling as though grasping for something invisible. "This house," she murmured, "was built on a promise. A promise sealed long before your father was born. The ridge grants life, but it demands continuation. It demands blood. And a mother ensures it." Her voice cracked into a dry whisper. "I will not fail this land." Ephraim lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. "Stop talking like this." For the first time in months, emotion tore across her face, ferocious, maternal, unhinged. "You are mine," she hissed. "Both of you. Bone of my bone. Seed of my seed. You will carry the line forward." Silas felt nausea twist through him. He understood now. The ridge had too many stories. Too many curses. Too many names for what it demanded. Some families gave their lives. Others gave their sanity. But the crows, Silas had always sensed something different in his mother's fixation on purity, on family, on blood. But never, never, had he imagined this. Ephraim recoiled, disgust contorting his features. You've gone mad. Miriam didn't blink. Madness is the word the fearful use to hide from duty. The candle went out. Darkness swallowed the attic. Silas's breath hitched. Ephraim cursed under his breath. And in the dark, something shifted, something that did not belong to any of them. A soft exhale. Step. A presence moving between the brothers, brushing cold fingers along their spines. Miriam's voice returned, now from somewhere they could not pinpoint. You will continue the line. Whether by devotion, or by force of the ridge itself. Silas grabbed Ephraim's arm and pulled him down the stairs, stumbling into the hallway. Below them the house creaked, not with age but with intention. They slammed the attic door shut, breathless, terrified. Inside the footsteps continued. Slow. Measured. Growing heavier. Ephraim whispered, "She ain't alone." Silas didn't answer. The truth felt too dangerous to acknowledge. And the ridge, hidden behind its veil of fog, listened with hunger. The next morning arrived with a colorless sky, the kind that made Hollow Ridge look drained of life. A brittle wind scraped against the house, rattling shutters that had held firm for decades. Silas and Ephraim sat at the table, untouched bowls of cornmeal cooling before them. Neither spoke. Sleep had not visited them. It had merely circled in the dark, waiting to witness their unraveling. Their mother did not appear. Ephraim dared to hope she had collapsed from exhaustion, that madness had burned itself out. But Silas knew better. The house felt alert, listening, expecting, as if Miriam crows lingered in every beam. When the floorboard at the stairs creaked, both brothers stiffened. Miriam descended, her hair pinned neatly, her eyes hollow but steady. She moved with the calm certainty of someone who had made a terrible decision and found peace in it. In her hands she carried their father's journal, a leather-bound ledger he had guarded more fiercely than the family's meager earnings. Silas whispered, "How did you get that?" Miriam stopped at the edge of the table. "I took what I needed." Ephraim's lip curled. It was locked in his trunk. Locks are for the unchosen. Her voice was soft, reverent. "We were chosen." Silas's throat tightened. "Chosen for what?" Her fingers stroked the journal like a living creature. "For the duty your father ran from." But he could not escape the ridge. She opened to a page marked with ash. Their father's handwriting was frantic, ink smeared, letters pressed with near-violent pressure. Silas leaned closer and felt a tremor move through him. Ephraim read aloud, teeth gritted. "They come at night. They whisper from the walls. They want sons. They want daughters. They want the line to continue." Silas's breath hitched. Another line. "Do not let Miriam hear them. She is too faithful. She will obey." Miriam smiled faintly. He feared what he was too weak to accept. Ephraim slammed his fist on the table. "Ma, listen to yourself. You believe whispers from walls? Some mountain curse? You're letting grief rot your mind." But Miriam did not look at him. She looked past him, through him, toward something in the space just beyond the dining room door. Her pupils dilated. "They're here," she whispered. Silas followed her gaze. At first he saw nothing. Just the dim hallway, lined with portraits of long-dead Crow ancestors whose paint had cracked into 1,000 fine lines. But then, something shifted. A darker shadow among other shadows, a suggestion of height, of limbs too long for a human silhouette. The candle on the table sputtered. Silas pushed back his chair. "We're leaving this house." Miriam's head snapped toward him. "No one leaves," she said. Ephraim stood. "Watch us." She lifted her hand. The door to the hallway slammed shut on its own. Silas froze. Ephraim swore violently. And from upstairs, something began to descend. Something that moved with the slow, deliberate weight of a creature not accustomed to human boundaries. Silas reached for his coat. "We're going out the back. Now." Ephraim grabbed the rifle from above the hearth. Not because he believed it would help, there were no bullets for curses, but because fear made men cling to the nearest weapon. Before they could take a step, Miriam placed the journal on the table with ceremonial care. "You will understand," she said. "This land feeds on legacy. Every crow before you served it. The ridge gives only one command: continue the line." Silas shook his head. "No. We're ending this." Miriam's smile softened into sorrow. "You cannot end what began before your grandfather's grandfather took his first breath." The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Silas and Ephraim turned in unison, and saw it. The figure was not entirely visible. Not entirely real. More impression than body. But its outline was unmistakably human. And wrong. As if a person had been stretched, elongated, rewritten by something ancient. The air thickened. The shadows bent toward it. The brothers stepped back. Miriam bowed her head as though in prayer. "He walks with the old ones," she murmured. "He carries the will of the ridge." Ephraim lifted the rifle and fired. The trigger clicked. Empty. Silas dragged him toward the back door, but the boards under their feet pulsed, creaking in rhythm, expanding and contracting like the slow breath of something alive. The entire floor seemed to hold them, restrain them. Ephraim stumbled. "The house, Silas, the house is moving." Silas pulled harder. "Don't stop. Don't." A vertical crack split up the wall beside them, wood splintering outward. From within the wall came a whisper, female, distant, sorrowful. "Stay." Silas nearly dropped to his knees. The house was speaking. Ephraim threw his shoulder into the door. It didn't open. Miriam approached them, her expression filled with a terrible tenderness. "My sons," she whispered. "You were born for this. The ridge grows hungry. And our blood knows the way." Silas lunged at her, trembling. "You're sacrificing us." "No," she said. "I'm honoring you." The figure from the stairs glided closer. Its form flickered like heat above tar. The temperature dropped so sharply Silas's breath turned crystalline. Ephraim pushed Silas behind him. "Stay back," he growled at the apparition, though his voice wavered. But the thing did not pause. Its arm, if one could still call it an arm, extended slowly as if inviting them into its grasp. Miriam stepped aside. "It is time," she whispered. Silas felt something inside him break, some last tether that had held his sanity taut. He grabbed Ephraim's sleeve. "We run. Window, now." The two threw themselves toward the nearest window. Ephraim raised the rifle and smashed the glass, shards spraying into the winter air. The instant they leapt through, the ridge seemed to exhale, a long, angry, hollow sound that swept across the trees. They landed in the snow, rolling hard. Silas scrambled up, dragging his brother. Behind them, through the broken window, Miriam stood watching, silhouetted by candlelight, her hands clasped, her eyes shining with triumph. "You cannot flee your own blood," she whispered, her voice carried on the wind. "The ridge will take what is owed." And from inside the house, the footsteps resumed. Heavier. Closer. More than one. They ran until their breath scraped like broken glass inside their lungs, until the forest swallowed the last flicker of their mother's candlelight behind them. Snow clung to their coats in stiff patches, branches whipped their faces, and the ground, frozen, uneven, seemed to resist their escape with every step. Hollow Ridge had always been steep, but tonight it felt vertical, like the mountain itself was rising against them. Silas stopped only when his legs gave out. He collapsed beside a fallen pine, his chest heaving. Ephraim crouched beside him, one hand pressed to his ribs, the other clutching the useless rifle like a lifeline. The silence around them was too sudden, too absolute. Even the wind had died, as though the whole ridge were holding its breath. Silas listened. No pursuit. No footsteps. No voice. But the stillness carried its own warning, like the pause before a storm shatters the first tree. Ephraim whispered, "We're miles from home." Silas answered, "We're not far enough." He could still feel the house's breath beneath his boots. The whispers from the walls had not left his ears. Something ancient had awakened, and it wanted them. Their mother was only the vessel. The ridge itself was the mouth. The brothers pressed deeper into the forest, moving through patches of moonlight and shadow. The trees grew stranger as they descended, twisted, gnarled, some carved with symbols Silas had never noticed before. They resembled spirals, but broken, as if drawn by a hand that feared finishing the shape. "Pa knew," Ephraim murmured. "He knew this place was wrong." Silas nodded. "That's why he fought her. That's why he burned those pages." They stopped at a narrow ravine where the snow thinned and the ground revealed a carpet of dead leaves. In the center of the ravine stood a post, weather-beaten, cracked, and tied with rope that had decayed into fibers. Silas's stomach tightened. A binding post. Old-timers whispered about them. Places where families once tied their mad to keep them from wandering into the woods. But this one had carvings. Crow carvings. "Someone from our line was kept here," Ephraim said, tracing a groove in the wood. "Not a stranger. One of us." Silas found another carving, 2 letters barely legible beneath moss. "MC. Miriam Crow." His throat closed. Ephraim's face drained of color. "They tied her here as a girl. Pa said she was born quiet and strange. But what if? Silas didn't let him finish. A branch cracked high above them. Then another. The brothers snapped to attention. Snow began to fall again, not soft flakes but heavy clumps as if shaken loose by something climbing through the branches. Silas whispered, "We run again." But Ephraim didn't move. He was staring at the ground behind them. Silas followed his gaze and felt the air leave him. Tracks. Not animal. Not human. Long, narrow impressions with drag marks beside them, like fingers or claws touching the ground. And there were many. Dozens. Some old, softened by snow. Some fresh. Too fresh. The brothers backed away slowly. Silas murmured, "It's not just one." There were never just one. The trees behind them rustled with a slow, deliberate movement. The brothers didn't wait to see what rose from the dark. They fled again, stumbling down the slope, breath ragged, but a cold certainty bloomed in Silas's chest. Hollow Ridge had hosts. When they burst onto the main road, the night felt thinner, almost survivable. Ahead of them lay the faint outline of Hollow Ridge Chapel, its steeple crooked, its windows dark. A single lantern, forgotten by the caretaker, flickered at the entrance. Ephraim grabbed Silas's arm. "We can hide there. Just until dawn." Silas hesitated. The chapel was the oldest building on the ridge. Older than their house. Older than any Crow grave. The idea of entering it felt almost like stepping into the heart of the curse. But the footsteps were coming. They ran inside. The chapel smelled like damp wood and dead flowers. Snow tracked across the floor behind them. Ephraim pushed the door shut, breathing hard. Silas found a pew and collapsed, pressing his palms to his eyes. The silence returned. Then something shifted in the room. A whisper, not human but close, moved along the walls. Silas lifted his head. The lantern flickered, then steadied, illuminating the wooden panels behind the altar. For the first time he noticed the carvings etched into the panels, spirals, deformities, symbols matching the ones on the binding post. Ephraim breathed, "No. Not here too." A figure stepped from behind the altar. Not an apparition. Not a monster. Their mother. Miriam's hair clung to her face, wet with snow. Her dress was torn at the hem, her feet bare, her skin pale as the frost outside. But her eyes held a feverish clarity. "You ran," she said quietly. "But blood remembers the way." Ephraim lifted the rifle, shaking with rage. "Stay back." Miriam approached the altar. She placed her hand on the carved spirals. "Your father tried to stop it. He hid the truth. He locked me away as a child because I heard them sooner than he did. But the ridge speaks to every crow in time." Silas stepped forward. "Ma, this ends now. Whatever curse, whatever madness this is, let us go." Her expression softened with a sorrow so deep it trembled her whole body. "It ends only when the ridge is fed." The chapel doors shook violently. Then again. Something outside pushed against them. No single creature. Many. Silas grabbed Ephraim's arm. "There's a cellar door. Pa used to store tools here." They lunged for the floorboards behind the last pew. Silas tore up the loose plank and found the rusted latch. He pulled. The cellar breathed cold, damp air up the stairwell. Ephraim looked back at Miriam. She wasn't chasing them. She was praying. Silas grabbed his brother's wrist. "We go. Now." They dropped into the darkness just as the chapel doors burst open. The cellar swallowed them whole. They huddled in the dark, hearing the scrape of two long limbs against the chapel floor, hearing whispers slip through cracks, hearing their mother's voice rising above it all like a hymn. When dawn finally came, the brothers emerged, shaking, hollow, exhausted. The chapel was empty. Miriam Crow was gone. So were the things that followed her. In the years that passed, Silas and Ephraim became wanderers, two shadows traveling far from the ridge that birthed them. They never returned to the Crow house. They never rebuilt what burned behind them. They carried only one truth. Some bloodlines were carved by human hands. But others were shaped by mountains. And Hollow Ridge was still hungry. If this tale left even a small shadow in your thoughts, let it breathe a little longer. Like and subscribe so more forgotten horrors may rise again.